Law enforcement swept the son-in-law's home once the victim's jewelry was spotted nearby. Yet, the clue proved superficial and faded since the area looked manipulated or clearly faked. Meanwhile, internet clips gained traction depicting a person with 6 fingers in Savannah surveillance tapes. Doubts began to swirl around those within her inner circle. Relative Tomaso became a primary focus regarding Nancy Guthrie's vanishing, as he allegedly saw her last. Fresh video evidence has surfaced concerning the purported abduction of the elderly woman. Federal agents provided recordings from her porch showing a disguised individual at the entrance. This initial glimpse at a person of interest shifted the public's gaze toward Gianni. Online sleuths compared federal snapshots with Gianni's old portraits, while he remained completely mute. He ignored the detectives, the released tapes, and the national news cycles broadcasting his name. Not a single word escaped him while his kin begged for information on camera. On February 1st, 2026, Nancy vanished, leaving her vital heart device behind. The security system was wrecked, and a faint crimson path led out the rear exit. Her son-in-law, the final witness, sought legal counsel and shut down until this moment. Following endless months of public outcry and heavy suspicion, the relative has finally decided to talk. His recent admission completely reframes the narrative of what occurred within those walls. Before revealing his statement, you must grasp why that long stretch of silence was critical. This exceeds a typical missing person case. We are talking about an 84-year-old grandmother. She raised a prominent media figure and spent 80 years dedicated to her family in town. That winter evening transformed her peaceful residence into a site for criminal forensics. If this is your first time, welcome. We hunt for reality, not just clicks. Follow us for updates, because justice only arrives when the full story is told. Let's start. February 1st, 2026, in the city of Tucson, Arizona. Nancy Guthrie is relaxing in her longtime residence within a suburban area known for total tranquility. At 84, she was not as nimble as she had been in her youth. Yet her mind was sharp, her spirit independent, and she stayed busy with her 5 children. She had outlived her spouse, Charles, who passed away in 1988. Managing her solitary life with dignity, she had served the local university for many years. Though not a celebrity, she was a respected pillar of the community with fragile health. A pacemaker inside her chest kept her heart steady, a device she absolutely required to survive. Without that medical assistance, she was in grave danger, which is a pivotal fact here. That night, her son-in-law, Tomaso, showed up at the house for a visit. Digital transport logs confirmed he arrived for what he called a standard family meal. Everything seemed perfectly mundane until he departed later that night using a ride-share service. Nancy was by herself, but she had disappeared by the time morning light hit. Discovering the open back door and destroyed cameras suggested this was no ordinary accident. The life-saving device was pulled out and discarded, while blood stained the floor toward the exit. No locks were broken and no glass shattered. Strangely, the pet never made a sound. The culprit was either welcomed inside or possessed a way to enter the home freely. Local authorities and crime scene analysts arrived to process the residence and gather vital evidence. Federal investigators stepped in quickly as the hunt for the final witness began to intensify. The individual in question was Tomaso, who held legal control over Nancy's estate. This gave him the power to oversee her wealth, a common arrangement for aging relatives. While typical for many families, this financial link felt far more ominous given the circumstances. Detectives immediately reached out to him to schedule a formal interview regarding the night. Tomaso said no, bringing in a legal expert to protect his silence via his constitutional rights. Legally, he was covered. To the world, this seemed incriminating. As time slipped away, the community's distrust only deepened. Federal investigators put out blurry footage from the victim's entrance, showing a gloved intruder approaching that evening. This individual moved with calculation and poise. Shortly after those frames were captured, the recording equipment was smashed. 3 separate Bitcoin demands appeared. Authorities later identified these as the work of a con artist chasing a quick payday, a pointless distraction that led nowhere. Police briefly held Tomaso near the international boundary in Rio Rico, Arizona. Court-ordered searches hit his residences. Detectives grabbed his computers, sifted through his wardrobe, and pored over bank statements. Prosecutors filed nothing, yet he remained tight-lipped, Meanwhile, the victim's child, a famous news anchor for the Today Show, stepped before the press as a grieving relative. With a cracking voice, she begged for leads. She stepped away from her job. Her kin put up $50,000. The Bureau doubled the pot. Signs went up all over the state. Her portrait watched the roads, posing a silent inquiry. Where could she be? As seasons shifted, the lack of news became agonizing. Suddenly, the momentum swung. Detectives began scrutinizing the logs from the victim's internal heart monitor. High-tech cardiac devices track vitals, rhythm patterns, physical tension, and specific moments in time. Those digital records pinpointed the exact instant when the hardware was deactivated. They compared that window against rideshare logs, mobile activity, and tower signals. According to insiders, the math didn't add up. In private meetings, the task force presented the defense with evidence that hadn't hit the papers yet. Right after that sit-down, a press conference was called. The timing shocked everyone involved. For months, he'd stood behind a wall of silence. Now flanked by counsel before a swarm of media, he finally spoke. "I didn't take her," he declared to a hushed audience. "I never intended to hurt her," he added slowly. However, something did occur that night. That single admission completely upended the assumptions the public had already etched in stone. Based on his version, the night of February 1st was anything but ordinary. A heated dispute had unfolded where she revealed plans to rewrite her will and strip him of financial control. He admitted he was angry, but not aggressive. He left the premises, citing rideshare receipts as his alibi. Then he dropped a bombshell. After returning to his place, he got a frantic call from her. She was terrified. He hurried back to the residence, but this time he didn't call a driver. He took his own car, claiming the initial probe only looked at his rideshare history. The public hadn't known about his personal car's tracking data. He claimed he found her wounded and spiraled into shock. Instead of dialing 911, he made a series of life-altering mistakes. He pulled the device, wrongly thinking it was malfunctioning and hurting her. Medical professionals, however, debunked that story immediately. He kept talking. He maintained she was still alive when he walked out the second time. He swore he didn't kidnap her. He said she'd vanished by his next visit. He did admit to breaking the tech. He confessed to staying silent and withholding facts, but he maintained his innocence regarding her death. The fallout was massive. Experts labeled the confession a partial admission with heavy legal stakes. Authorities began building a case for several potential crimes. Hiding evidence, hindering an investigation, and reckless homicide were all on the table. Her family issued a measured response, noting the new details while reminding everyone she is still missing. Savannah stayed away from the studio that day. The entire narrative of the case had just been rewritten. Now there was proof he went back. Now there was a confession about the broken security system. Now there was an excuse for the frantic cleanup. Yet no remains have been found, nor a cause of death. The mystery of the cloaked intruder remains. Was that actually him returning, or was it a third party? Crime scene experts are revisiting the evidence with these new facts: spatter, car logs, pings, and heart data. Why the pet didn't react makes sense if the person entering was someone it recognized. The absence of a break-in fits a familiar visitor, but the biggest mystery remains unsolved. Supposing she survived his second departure, what followed? Was there a desperate struggle to escape despite her wounds? Could a stranger have stepped in? Might she have wandered, dazed, into the arid darkness? Perhaps a hidden culprit remains? No indictments have surfaced yet, but detectives have shifted their focus away from the wall of silence. The spotlight is now on an admission. Such revelations alter the entire landscape. We are no longer guessing who the perpetrator might be. The goal now is defining the specific crimes committed. The 84-year-old with cardiac issues remains completely unaccounted for. As a beloved matriarch, her sudden disappearance unmasked serious fractures in household devotion, journalistic integrity, and senior safety. This tragedy unmasked an ugly reality. Keeping quiet might offer legal shelter, but it ruins reputations. Once the dam breaks, it shatters into jagged pieces. Anyone with leads regarding the missing woman should notify the local police or federal agents immediately. A six-figure bounty remains active. Minor clues are vital, as the truth is buried somewhere, perhaps in a file, the desert sand, or a courtroom. Her tale hasn't ended yet. This inquiry continues until every detail is surfaced and the full truth is revealed. Fairness demands more than just silence. It requires transparency. Nancy deserves nothing less than the whole truth. When secrets leak, the fallout is messy. Tension lines that existed for years finally gave way. Initially, the events of February 1st, 2026 seemed straightforward. The guest visited the Arizona house by rideshare, ate dinner, then departed. Around midnight, a cloaked intruder sabotaged the security system. Then, the elderly woman was gone. That narrative was widely accepted until the suspect admitted to returning later that evening, causing the story to crumble. Investigators are now piecing the puzzle back together, examining every single second of that night. Receipts show he exited at 9:47 p.m., matching rideshare records. Navigation data places him home just after 10:05 p.m. A secret later surfaced. The victim called him at 10:32. The call spanned 47 seconds, though its contents remained hidden for months. The man offered no context, and no one questioned him publicly. It was merely a footnote in a stack of legal documents. Now, he asserts she begged for his return. According to him, she sounded panicked, gasping for air, and utterly disoriented. He claims he drove back in his own car rather than calling a cab. That marks a second chapter. Technicians have verified his vehicle's computer connected to a tower in that area. Data suggests he was back in the neighborhood between 10:50 and 11:05 p.m. Law enforcement kept this crucial information under wraps for several months while building their case. This return trip forces a re-evaluation of the hooded figure seen on the porch just before 12. Was it him? The clip captures a silhouette draped in dark layers, wearing gloves. He stands near 5'11", matching the 5'9" to 6'1" estimate. The individual behaves with purpose, showing no signs of hesitation while disabling the surveillance cameras at the entry. If he was only there to help, why did he hide? He justifies his actions as pure terror, claiming he feared the neighbors would judge him for returning. He insists the gloves were meant to keep his touch off family property during a private crisis. Legal authorities have yet to comment. Let us dissect the claims of this second encounter. The suspect states he used a side entrance, which explains why there was no sign of a break-in. Crime scene photos verify this entry point. He alleges he discovered the woman collapsed on the floor. He spotted blood. Not much, but enough to send him into shock. Forensic experts noted the spray patterns suggested a body in motion rather than a single violent strike. Traces then trailed toward the hall near her cardiac monitor. This is the most debated part of his tale. He maintained she was clutching her chest, struggling. His story is that the heart device was failing. Specialists now argue that ripping out cardiac equipment in a non-medical setting is hardly a logical reaction to seeing someone suffer a heart attack. Still, he confesses to pulling it. No scalpel, no caution, he simply yanked it. Police eventually discovered the unit lying loose upon the tiles. Current hardware logs, vital stats, which detectives accessed. At 11:17 p.m., Nancy's pulse surged with intensity. Irregular rhythms surfaced at 11:18 p.m. A minute later, logging ceased entirely, matching the exact window Tomaso admitted to being inside the room. He claims she stayed alive initially. Overwhelmed by terror, he simply lost control. Rather than dialing 911, he allegedly weighed the potential fallout. Recalling their inheritance dispute, he feared the optics of her passing mid-quarrel and how the blame would inevitably land squarely on him. Detectives are currently scrutinizing that specific chain of mental events. While fear justifies freezing, it never excuses vandalism. Tomaso confessed to wrecking the surveillance gear. He alleges he acted to prevent confusion, yet ruining proof is seldom viewed as mere anxiety. It signals a deliberate cover-up. Lab tests on the lens casing reveal heavy trauma, probably caused by that steel hearth tool located in the shed. No prints link the suspect to that poker yet. He likely wore hand coverings. Then there is the Crimson Path. Police suspect Nancy managed to crawl or walk somewhat independently once her rhythm regulator was ripped out. Splatter marks indicate a shaky struggle toward the back corridor. One mystery persists. If Nancy remained vital and active past 11:19 in the evening, what was her destination? Tomaso asserts that near 11:30 p.m., Nancy went completely silent. Finding no heartbeat, he became convinced she had expired, so he just walked away from the residence. He offers no reason for leaving the rear entrance ajar, nor for failing to summon a medical team. He claims she vanished before his quick comeback, though police haven't confirmed his second visit to the property. That exit exhibited zero trauma or friction scars, suggesting nobody was pulled roughly through the threshold toward the yard. Canine units followed her trail until the fence line before the scent evaporated, leaving the authorities to face a grim new reality. Did an outside party take Nancy once Tomaso departed? Perhaps she stumbled out, hurt, and fell? That harsh Tucson landscape easily hides secrets in its vast sands. The area is massive. Scavengers hint. Electronics tell a story too. Her mobile went dark at 11:26 p.m. and has remained offline ever since. His phone showed total stagnation between 12 a.m. and 6:14 a.m., but police haven't disclosed if he was simply sleeping or hiding something. Consider the incentive now. Per the report, Nancy planned on rewriting her legacy to strip him of his control over the family wealth. She already had an appointment booked with her lawyer for Friday. Bank statements reveal zero unusual movements or drained accounts prior to her vanishing. Often, domestic violence originates from a fear of losing status rather than chasing a quick payday. The state must prove that the loss of inheritance was both certain and massive. Relatives like Savannah Guthrie haven't discussed the trust details openly. Annie, who is both the suspect's spouse and victim's child, has offered no comments. Legal experts anticipate indictments for interfering with the case. Wrecking the cameras makes a tampering charge inevitable, but murder counts hinge entirely upon proving how she actually died. Lacking remains. The Crown depends on indirect clues and hospital logs. The cardiac log proves tampering, but not a fatality. Given her history, lasting long without the machine is doubtful, though fleeting survival isn't scientifically out of the question. Those brief moments following the deactivation constitute the most vital phase of this entire mystery. Authorities are currently re-examining the video of the disguised person with advanced scanning tools. Movement experts are analyzing strides while digital skeletal overlays are being created. Matching that shadow to Tomaso proves premeditation. However, a mismatch would blow the whole investigation wide open. For now, the detectives are playing it safe. Tomaso did fess up to going back. He owned up to cutting the heart device. He copped to smashing the surveillance. He swears he didn't end Nancy, and she's still gone. The first part of this story doesn't wrap up neatly. It concludes with a much grittier schedule because we've confirmed that second visit. We've got proof the rhythm box went dead at 11:19 p.m. Those lenses were totaled on purpose. No one ever dialed 911, and since that dark evening, Nancy just evaporated into thin air. When folks spin tall tales, they've got to track their lies. When the physical proof talks, it doesn't. It just keeps a log. In the case of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the cold, silent facts might be the only witness that can't be bullied. Following the confession where he verified his return trip to her place and admitting he pulled the plug on her heart monitor and broke the gear, the detectives pivoted their entire strategy. The big mystery wasn't whether he returned. It shifted to what went down between 10:50 p.m. and 12 a.m. That 1-hour window likely holds the truth between a mistake and a plan. Let's look at the most chilling piece of the puzzle: Nancy's heart regulator. Today's gadgets aren't just sitting there, they keep tabs. They track every single beat. They record the electricity in the chest right down to the second. Some even catch a hard hit or weird physical strain. Once the experts pulled the logs from her unit, they managed to piece together those final recorded cardiac moments. At 11:16 and 42 p.m., her pulse spiked. At 11:17 and 8 p.m., things got shaky. At 11:18 and 51 p.m., the heart's rhythm turned chaotic. At 11:19 and 3 p.m., the device registered a total blackout. That final mark, 11:19 and 3 p.m., isn't just a breakdown. That is exactly when someone ripped the hardware out. The heart specialist checking the logs decided the tech wasn't just dying on its own. Someone shut it down by force. And this is where Tomaso's tale starts to fall apart. If Nancy was awake and moving at 11:19 p.m., pulling that plug would have caused a massive medical crisis, horrible chest pain, spinning rooms, and a sudden fall. But the crimson stain shows she moved after that clock stopped, which points to a major flaw in the story. The lab techs put in serious time mapping out the stains inside Nancy's house. The red marks weren't from a blast. There wasn't any spray from a swing or a nicked artery. Rather, the team spotted a wipe near the rug, some messy tracks, drops leading to the back, and a light smudge by the exit. The experts figured Nancy was probably on her feet for a bit after the first hit. The path hints at her being dragged or stumbling alone. However, the lack of a mess suggests one of three things. The wound wasn't a quick end. The bleeding stayed inside. Someone tried to mop up or disturb the area. Chemical sprays showed faint scrub marks along the floorboards. Tiny, messy, but definitely there. If Tomaso lost his cool and broke the tech, did he also try to hide the mess? He says no way. The cops are keeping that option on the table. Since Tomaso confessed to taking his own ride back to Nancy's, the feds grabbed the car's computer records. Current cars are basically rolling black boxes that remember everything. GPS tags, speed logs, door activity, engine start sequences, even seat sensors. The data reveals his vehicle engine cranked at 10:46 p.m. The tracker shows him pulling up near her block at 11:02 p.m. He killed the engine at 11:04 p.m. The car didn't budge until 11:37 p.m. He cranked it back up at 11:38 p.m. That 34-minute gap matches up perfectly with when the heart device went dark at 11:19 p.m., meaning Tomaso was right there when the pulse monitor was cut. He said as much. But here's what the law is digging into now. At 11:38 p.m. when the car roared to life, the data shows he took a little side trip before heading home. That little deviation took exactly 6 minutes. The satellites placed his car by a dry creek bed less than 2 miles from Nancy's place. Teams have already combed that area. They found zero. But that side road visit isn't in Tomaso's paperwork. He just says he was driving to settle his nerves. Authorities have stayed silent, while the Bureau's sharpened footage of that masked figure stalking Nancy's grounds remains a top talking point. Once Tomaso admitted returning, specialists in walking styles joined the hunt. They checked step length and arm balance. These pros scrutinized shoulder lean and head position for their report. This person's stride matches, yet doesn't perfectly mirror Tom's natural rhythmic movement. Basically, while he is a likely candidate, the grainy video lacks the clarity needed for a definitive conviction. Projections suggest the prowler stands between 5 feet 10 and 6 feet tall. Since Tomaso is 5'11", he fits perfectly. Unfortunately, mittens hid any identifiable palm details. That gear was totally plain, lacking any brand names. Nevertheless, a single feature grabbed their attention. That cloaked person lingers a moment by the lens before killing the power. It wasn't out of shock, but rather to verify the device's spot. This implies the intruder knew the floor plan. Nancy's pet stayed silent throughout the ordeal. Detectives view this as a major sign that the visitor was a familiar face. Her mobile went dark at 11:26 in the evening, losing all signal. Meanwhile, Tomaso's device stayed off from 11:41 until 6:14 the next morning. Police still haven't determined if that downtime was due to rest, flight settings, or a deliberate power off. However, tech experts emphasize that switching off electronics during a crime is a standard tactic for suspects. This wipes out position history and minimizes digital footprints. Even so, a lack of information doesn't verify a crime. It is merely a void. Money detectives are currently scrutinizing Nancy's inheritance paperwork. Files show she'd set a meeting with legal counsel for February 3rd, just 2 days after vanishing. Rough copies point to shifting control over funds rather than removing anyone completely. Those details are vital in court. Any reason for murder needs to fit. Was Tomaso's bank account empty? Nope. Was he losing his grip? Maybe. Killing doesn't need hopelessness, it just needs a sense of danger. That short car side trip by the arid creek led to massive hunts. Canine units were sent in. Scanners checked deep soil, while drones looked for fresh digging. They found nothing, yet the local landscape evolves rapidly. Dust hides tracks, and scavengers move things around. Because of this, the search there isn't officially over. Plus, the main scientific hurdle in this mystery persists. There isn't a physical victim to examine. Lacking a corpse, medical examiners can't pinpoint how she died, when it happened, or if she was killed indoors. Heart monitor logs point toward a massive medical emergency. However, a failing heart doesn't always mean a fatality. She might have fallen and been hauled away, or perhaps she simply strolled off while feeling dazed. That idea doesn't mesh with what the bloodhounds found or the lack of any lingering smell. The state's team is focusing on one main question. Was smashing those lenses a frantic reaction or a cold, planned cover-up? Fear creates clutter and mistakes. It usually doesn't involve the orderly dismantling of several pieces of security gear. Forethought shows in the details. The impacts on those monitors were incredibly accurate. That mysterious door shut earlier that week looks fishy. The driving diversion is weird too. Still, Tomaso chose to talk. This messes with the legal plan, since killers hardly ever confess to small bits unless they feel trapped. Did police squeeze him with enough proof to make him offer up a curated story? Or is he spinning the story his way before any warrants are served? Every probe reaches a moment where curiosity fades and the courtroom reality takes over. So far, Nancy's missing person case sat in that limbo between hunch and evidence, between anger and arrest, and between rumors and truth. After Tomaso Chion confessed his actions, his admission about going back, killing the gear, and ignoring the emergency line made that uncertainty vanish. In private, the district attorney stopped wondering if a crime had actually taken place. They focused on which statutes matched his story. A secret panel gathered in Puma County without fanfare, reviewing just the hard facts. Heart logs, car logs, and bloodstains. Quiet phones, that weird garage incident, the Dry Creek Drive, and the heaviest blow, the suspect's own mouth. Court experts familiar with these puzzles suggest the government is now at a major turning point. Nobody makes murder cases difficult, yet doable. Convincing a jury requires absolute proof that Nancy Guthrie passed away and that Tomaso's behavior caused that tragic end directly. Logs from her heart device indicate someone tampered with it in a way that was clearly lethal. Surgeons testified that ripping a heart regulator out of a sick person can cause a deadly rhythm collapse in mere moments. Legal counsel will insist that coincidences aren't crimes, claiming the woman might have stayed alive long enough to walk out alone. Their team will claim a freakout isn't a homicide, forcing the state to widen the scope of their entire investigation. Can the state land a manslaughter charge if murder fails? Or perhaps they can pivot toward a case involving extreme criminal recklessness. Hiding the truth is a simpler conviction, especially since he confessed to destroying the security hardware with his own hands. Blocking the law is obvious because he didn't call for help. Harming a defenseless senior is another likely path for charges. At 84, she relied on medicine and his fiscal control, making every single accusation carry significant prison time and legal gravity. While jail awaits him, no legal maneuver solves the mystery her relatives truly care about. Where has she been taken? As the secret court hearings dragged on, the friction between the grieving Guthrie relatives grew much more intense and painful. Savannah stayed hidden from the cameras, yet insiders noted their optimism had withered into a cold, gritty determination to find answers. Grit. Annie, the suspect's partner, hasn't stepped into the light since her last official comment went out to the press. Sources claim she is trapped. If she thinks he just lost his cool, she must admit his error killed her own mother. Should she trust the police, she must face the fact her husband purposefully caused a tragedy that can never be undone. When a home breaks apart during a crime, it rarely happens with shouting. Instead, the bonds simply wither away in silence. Silent phones replace texts, seasonal gatherings get canceled, and deep talks are traded for a permanent, chilly lack of any communication. Local gossip moved past his guilt to focus on his specific crimes, a pivot that indicates the tide is turning against him. Rumors are just talk, but indictments are official. Meanwhile, as the state showed their hand, a fresh piece of info emerged. Money experts finished a thorough audit of the victim's bank statements to see if any wealth had vanished or been moved. Before she vanished, no big checks were cashed, no weird wires happened, and her investments stayed exactly where they had always been. This kills the idea of a simple cash grab, but motives aren't always about money owning the situation. It's its own dark incentive. Terribly wanting power or harboring a deep, simmering grudge can drive a man to do something truly unthinkable and quite violent. Lawyers are looking into whether a fight over her will push him into a reckless state that ended in her tragic death. The minute-by-minute map shown to jurors highlighted one fact. At 11:17 p.m., the elderly woman was still breathing and alive. 2 minutes later, her heart support was cut. By 11:38 p.m., the man's car was already speeding away from the house. He never dialed 911, never requested a medic, and there is zero proof he tried to help her survive. Since she survived his arrival but died after the tampering, his failure to help is the core issue of his legal duty. Given his legal authority and being right there during the crisis, he was strictly obligated by law to try and save her. Standing by during a health emergency is a crime, though his lawyers are already coming up with ways to spin the situation. The lawyers will claim he couldn't find a heartbeat and honestly thought she had already passed away before he even reacted. Their team will argue fear makes men stupid and that without a corpse, nobody can truly say what happened that fateful night. They'll warn the jury against guessing, while detectives snuck back out to the dry creek bed to look for any hidden remains. High-tech gear arrived on scene, specifically heat-seeking flying bots that can spot where the ground was recently dug up or moved around. Highly specialized hounds were brought in to sniff out the tiniest hint of a body breaking down in the hot desert air. Zero results. If she was taken away, she was hidden incredibly well, leading police back to a very chilling and dark theory. Is it possible the elderly woman actually walked out of the front door herself once her heart machine stopped working correctly? Could she have stumbled into the darkness, completely confused and unable to keep her balance, as her heart began to fail her? Trackers checked her path again. The dogs followed her smell right to the property line, where it suddenly stopped being detectable at all. You could say a car picked her up, or perhaps the desert winds just blew her scent away into the vast open space. Local gusts often erase tracks, yet the detectives think someone drove her away based on the way the scent just cut off. That quick, weird stop recorded on his car's tracking system is still the biggest red flag that nobody has been able to explain. His lawyers want their own experts to check the satellite logs, claiming a 6-minute delay is just normal traffic or a slight detour. The government team insists those few minutes provided the perfect window for him to dump the evidence where it wouldn't be found. These court sessions are private, yet experts believe an arrest is coming soon, perhaps not for murder, but enough to start a real trial. Nevertheless, regardless of formal accusations or a guilty verdict, a single void persists. Nancy Guthrie's physical self stays missing. Without her recovery, any sense of finality feels hollow. Legal fairness feels like mere paperwork. Rumors say Savannah confided in her inner circle that truth outweighs retribution. Bringing her mom home, regardless of her state, offers more solace than any prison term. Local residents keep their prayerful watches. Tiny flames still dance on the steps of St. Philip's in the Hills Episcopal Church. Missing posters stay taped up. That bounty is still on the table. Federal agents refuse to archive this file. While court tactics shift, the core reality stays stagnant. An 84-year-old grandmother simply vanished. Someone violently cut her heart monitor. Her residence was meticulously tampered with. Every security lens was shattered. Now, the individual who confessed to witnessing these horrors awaits the jury's call on whether his choices were pure terror or cold felonies. We are nearing the judicial tipping point. A formal charge is not a guilty finding, yet it represents a powerful statement. This proclamation signals that the state holds evidence beyond mere hunches. Entering this brand new chapter, a single truth remains unshakable. The quiet is over, clues have surfaced, certain truths were finally owned. Yet until Nancy Guthrie surfaces, dead or alive, this narrative lacks a conclusion because law without a recovery feels broken. Deep within the gap between digital logs and arid gusts, between heart monitors and broken glass, the ultimate answer hides. Official charges dropped right as the sun peaked. Forget the cinematic arrests, strobing sirens, or frantic journalists tailing a patrol car through a peaceful neighborhood. Rather, it was just a secret file opened at 8:17 in the morning at Pima County Superior Court, Arizona versus Tomaso. Remarkably, the counts were unexpected. No one saw a homicide charge on the initial list. A death penalty prosecution was absent. The paperwork instead cited reckless killing, destroying clues, blocking the law, and mistreating a senior. Each count painted a grim picture. Choosing manslaughter suggested that the district attorney assumed Nancy Guthrie had perished, despite her missing remains stemming from dangerous negligence rather than a cold plan, a hit, or a total lack of empathy. The prosecution's logic was surgical. At 11:19 at night, her internal regulator was violently stopped. Minutes prior, her heart beat normally. Her heart began to fail. She desperately needed a medical rescue. Alternately, the suspect smashed her security, vanished from the house, and never dialed for an ambulance. Per the state's claims, those specific choices directly resulted in her demise. Destroying the lenses meant tampering. Waiting to speak to the law constituted obstructing the search. Elder abuse charges recognized her fragility, her health needs, and his power of attorney. Missing remains did not halt the grand jury. State statutes in Arizona permit a trial without a corpse if the data clearly points toward a fatality. The legal team relied intensely on expert physicians. Heart specialists told jurors that an 84-year-old with her history would only live moments once her device failed without a hospital. They showcased digital heart logs. They displayed arterial spray indicating she fell right inside her own living room. They mapped out the bizarre driving route, which prompted the jury to approve the charges. The man surrendered before dusk. He offered no struggle. He kept his mouth shut. He walked free on bail the next morning. His hearing lasted minutes. To the judge's inquiry, he spoke 2 words: not guilty. Instantly, the focus shifted from solving the mystery to winning the trial. However, the courtroom move did not answer the biggest mystery, since a charge is not a conviction. It is merely a claim backed by suspicion, so the defense quickly crafted their rebuttal. Inside 48 hours, his lawyers called the media. They never refuted that the device stopped. They admitted the monitoring gear was destroyed. Rather, they twisted the chronology. They insisted the state lacks proof of her death on site. Plus, they cited the lack of a coroner. No post-mortem, no clock on her demise, and no verified reason for her passing. They stressed that Nancy was still walking after the device failed. They highlighted red stains suggesting she moved around. They proposed that a dazed and terrified Nancy could have wandered into the night by herself. They challenged the idea that her survival depended entirely on that electronic regulator. Paid specialists argued that certain individuals might endure short spans without help, assuming their natural rhythm remains somewhat steady. The defense claimed the state's murder allegations relied on guesswork rather than concrete evidence. They kept circling back to a chilling reality. No physical evidence means no corpse. Thus, a cloud of doubt remains. The community's opinion fractured instantly, with many viewing the formal charges as a long-awaited act of justice. Others felt the case was a reach fueled by press frenzies. Savannah Guthrie issued a brief message via their legal team. "We are still searching for the real story. We believe in the court system and care only about finding Mom." Annie stayed silent within professional groups. Soon, the entire ordeal became a textbook lesson on the limits of evidence. Does computer data prove a person is gone? Can biological guesses truly replace a physical examination of the dead? Is failing to call for help actually manslaughter? Such queries will shape the courtroom battle as officials keep digging. Detectives are still scrutinizing that 6-minute side trip into the barren landscape. Fresh earth specimens were scraped from under Tomaso's car. Lab testing on the particles is currently underway. Tiny botanical fibers were found on the chassis. Specialists are trying to link them to shrubs from the dry creek. It is tedious labor. Matching dirt does not confirm a burial occurred. It simply places the car at that specific location. Attorneys want the heart monitor logs thrown out, claiming the download process potentially corrupted the digital time markers. A preliminary session is on the calendar to decide if the judge will allow that specific evidence. Allowing those heart records would solidify the state's chronology. Without them, their legal argument falls apart completely. Simultaneously, the police returned to Nancy's house armed with high-tech 3D spatial mapping tools. They built a virtual map of the scattered crimson stains, modeled falling paths, and measured steps from the splatter. The data hints Nancy likely collapsed shortly after the device failed. Should this recreation survive a legal grilling, the idea she just walked away loses all credibility. However, the lack of a physical body continues to be the most powerful weapon for the accused. Jurors must believe Nancy is dead, and that Tomaso's negligence killed her rather than a simple, tragic error. Being reckless means knowing the danger. A blunder suggests he simply did not realize what was happening. That nuance will decide if he serves 40 years or goes home. As the fight looms, fresh summonses went out. Nancy's lawyer was ordered to speak regarding those talks about changing her will and inheritance. Cellular logs from that specific evening are undergoing deep forensic scans to recover wiped messages. Server archives are being combed through to see if Nancy recorded any thoughts or audio clips before she vanished. The defense team is lining up advocates. Peers from the university and pals call him a gentle, logical man. Good reputations do not change digital facts. Yet, computer logs cannot tell us why someone would do this. In the middle of the storm lies a void, a woman gone, an 84-year-old matriarch whose end is recorded only in binary code and red specs. The charges change the focus from the event to the proof. Calendars are being set. Finding impartial jurors will be tough. Early rulings will dictate the facts revealed to the world. But even with a guilty verdict and a long sentence, the mystery looming over this tragedy since day one will stay open until Nancy is finally located. For justice without finding her remains seems like an unfinished story. Sometime between 11:17 and 11:38 at night, in that quiet Tucson residence, a fatal event happened. Was it panic, negligence, or malice? 12 citizens will decide while facing the quiet that followed. Proceedings started 8 months after she vanished. By that point, the media noise had quieted down but remained ever present. Collective fascination settled into a tense, waiting game. Every seat was taken when the judge entered. Journalists, courtroom experts, neighbors who held vigils, and curious followers of the Heart Monitor saga watched. Nancy's kids sat in the front. Savannah avoided the spotlight and the lenses. She chose not to speak to anyone. She stayed with family, gaze steady and hands clasped. Tomaso walked in, avoiding their eyes. The state began with one line. On February 1st, 2026, the suspect picked cowardice over duty, a decision that ended Nancy Guthrie's existence. They guided the panel through the clock. 11:17 p.m. Nancy lives. 11:19 p.m. Heart device stops. 11:38 p.m. His car leaves. No emergency call made. Security smashed. Rear entrance wide open. Nancy was never coming back. Prosecutors displayed the heart rate data, showing a monitor where her pulse spiked, faltered, then turned into a silent digital line. A heart specialist took the stand, explaining that for an elderly woman so reliant on her device, instant medical help was her only chance. Every second counted, the doctor testified, yet those precious moments were simply thrown away. The jury watched a blood spatter simulation, a computer rendering suggesting the victim fell indoors right after the pacemaker was cut off. Evidence of a 6-minute detour near a dry creek bed was presented. Hysteria isn't a valid excuse for that specific stop. The state claimed it showed a calculated choice. They were fighting this case without a physical corpse. While admitting the body was missing, they insisted that a lack of remains didn't create doubt when the facts fit so perfectly. Then, the lawyers for the accused rose. The defense team conceded the device was detached. However, they painted a completely different picture of why it happened. They spoke of a chaotic scene filled with terror, an aging woman grabbing at her heart, and a relative with no medical background making a fatal, clumsy mistake. Their argument suggested the victim might have already been suffering a heart attack before anyone even messed with the equipment. The lawyers argued the 11:17 p.m. heart rate jump was just a natural occurrence. They pointed to the trail of blood to prove she was still walking. Her legal team insisted she was breathing when he walked out. They made sure the jury remembered that no one had actually found her. They challenged the dirt samples found in the car. Spending 6 minutes in a wasteland suburb doesn't prove he dumped a body, they argued. Expert witnesses were brought in to debunk the state's medical theories. They also presented people to vouch for his personality. Co-workers testified that the defendant was a calm, scholarly man who never acted on a whim. Longtime friends spoke of how he had looked after her for a decade. Then, the mood in the court shifted drastically as the accused stood up to testify. He wasn't forced to speak, but he wanted to. In a quiet voice, he recalled the fight over the inheritance, the heavy atmosphere, and his own deep shame. He detailed the moment he walked back inside. He recounted finding her slumped over on the carpet. He confessed to destroying the security system. He claimed he was terrified of being blamed, worried about the optics, and scared of losing his marriage and career. There was a heavy, prolonged silence when he was questioned about why he never dialed 911. "I assumed she was dead," he whispered, "and my brain just shut down." During the questioning, the lawyers for the state didn't let up. "Panic," the prosecutor mocked. And while panicking, your first instinct was to wreck the cameras instead of checking if she was still alive. He faltered, making the entire room feel claustrophobic. The state then circled back to their main point. Regardless of whether he was scared, being afraid doesn't give someone a free pass for their actions. If she was still breathing when he showed up and when the device stopped, his refusal to help essentially killed her. The legal battle dragged on for 3 weeks. Final pleas to the jury boiled the whole case down to two stories. The government claimed it was a case of total disregard for life. The defense insisted it was a heartbreaking accident. After 4 days of deliberation, a hush fell over the room as the manslaughter verdict was read. Convicted. For destroying evidence, he was found guilty. For lying to the police, he was also found guilty. For harming a helpless senior, he was convicted once more. No one cheered or cried out. The room just felt heavy with the gravity of the law. The man showed no emotion as the news hit. While his wife took a slow, pained breath, Annie stared at the floor. The final punishment was set for 30 days later. The magistrate eventually handed down a 22-year sentence. While reading the judgment, the court addressed the concept of moral obligation. When a helpless person relies on you during an emergency, you have a legal mandate to help. You opted to hide the truth instead. Winning the case didn't find the victim. Her body was still missing after the verdict. People kept looking for her in secret. Teams combed the dry riverbed 2 more times. The original search dogs retired while new ones took over. The bounty for her recovery was never taken down. Decades went by, and law students began studying the trial. It was a landmark case of a murder conviction without a body, based solely on tech data. It completely changed how people view the duties of caregivers and the use of medical tracking in a courtroom. The daughter went back to her news career. She avoided talking about the tragedy, but every year on the date she vanished, she went to the local chapel. Prayer lights still burned for her. The name of the missing woman was never forgotten by the people of Arizona. Her tragedy became a permanent part of local history, serving as a grim warning of how fast a life can fall apart. The courts were finished, but the ethical questions lingered. Was there a real desire to end her life? The 12 jurors didn't think he was a cold-blooded killer. However, they were certain his choices were what finished her off. Could a single different decision made around 11/17 have saved her? Most likely. The woman vanished on the 1st of February, 2026. The information from her heart device acted as the star witness. The stains on the floor told the rest of the story. Her missing status was proof enough. Even though she was never found, the law decided that someone had to pay for what happened that night. Eventually, the very stillness shielding Tomaso transformed into the evidence which sealed his fate. Way out across the arid Arizona landscape, hidden under restless gusts and vast heavens, the last material remnants likely remain totally undiscovered still. Yet regarding law, ethics, and general opinion, the mystery regarding those events within the Tucson residence stands resolved. Lacking total perfection or absolute clarity, but sufficient for judgment. Nancy Guthrie merited safety. She earned compassion. Someone should have dialed emergency services. That support never came. This specific negligence, above all other factors, eventually determined the outcome. Our narrative concludes right here. Through a guilty ruling, lingering mysteries, leaving relatives permanently changed, serving as proof that retribution occasionally lacks satisfaction, yet it manifests all the same. Here is what the story of Nancy Guthrie forces every single one of us to confront. The most dangerous threats to the people we love do not always come from strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes, they live inside the house. They sit at the dinner table. They smile at family gatherings. Nancy trusted the people around her. She had no reason not to. And that trust, that beautiful, innocent belief in the goodness of family, became the very thing that could not protect her. This case is not just a crime story. It is a warning. It is a mirror held up to every family watching right now. Check on your elderly parents. Know who holds legal power over their finances. Make sure the people trusted with their care are truly worthy of that trust. A pacemaker kept her heart beating. But no device in the world can protect someone when the danger comes from within. One call to 911. That was all it would have taken. One decision made differently, and Nancy might be home right now. Do not wait for tragedy to prove how much someone means to you. Call them today. Check on them tonight. Because some silences, once broken, cannot be undone.